Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss Suburbia, starring not Disturbia, but Suburbia from the 90s. Starring Giovanni Ribisi, Steve Zahn, Jace Bartok, Amy Carey, Nikki Cat, Ajay Naidu, and Parker Posey, directed by Richard Linklater. Now, this is my first two viewings of this for this show, so let's just get straight into this movie as I don't know too much about it. We open in a small town called Burnfield, and the audience gets introduced to the town itself before we meet our characters. Jeff, played by Giovanni Ribisi, living in a tent in his mother's garage, while Buff, played by Steve Zahn, is working at a pizza joint. And he calls his friend Frank, and Jeff's girlfriend Suze, played by Amy Carey, has to walk to where they all hang out later in the film that night, as we get to a convenience store and meet Nazir. Let me see if I say this right. Cowdhurt? Something like that? So forgive me if I said that wrong. Played by Ajay Naidu, who is an actor I know from a movie I'm going to review at some point, Office Space. And we meet Tim, played by Nikki Cat, who was in Dazed and Confused, and he's a character I don't really like while he's hanging out by the corner of the convenience store. He acts like a total asshole, but the other characters are interesting to watch. Suze is coming to the corner later from what she said, and she's going to be a wild as Jeff, Buff, and Tim are hanging out and they meet BB, saying that their friend Pony, the rock star played by Jace Bartok, is in town and would like to hang with them. And this movie is about stoners hanging out in their town for one whole night. And I like the way director Richard Linklater sets this for one night, like Slacker, Before Sunrise, and Dazed and Confused. But this is better than Slacker, but not as good as Before Sunrise and Dazed and Confused, in my opinion. Jeff is jealous of Pony as they walk back to the corner, and Nazir goes up to him and says he'll call the cops. And Tim pushes him around and calls him a parasite, as this motherfucker is racist. And his wife comes out with a gun, and Jeff apologizes to Nazir for Tim, and in my opinion, Buff is the best character in this whole damn movie, while Tim is such an asshole for this entire fucking movie. They move to a different place to hang out at a burger joint called Whataburger, which is located in some areas like Texas, for example, and other parts of the country. And Jeff and Suze have an argument about moving to New York, and Jeff doesn't really want to as he thinks, what's the point, while Buff and Tim buy some beers at a liquor store. And I like the movie as it is, good but not a great movie by Richard Linklater. Buff and Tim hang out on the roof while BB is approached by Buff and talk about a video he worked on until Pony shows up in his limousine with his assistant Erica, played by Parker Posey, as Buff has the hots for her, while she has the hots for Tim, who he with Jeff and Suze eventually show up. And Jeff has been writing songs ever since he started a band together. And Pony was acting like he doesn't give a shit, while Jeff is acting like a douchebag and offers Suze to draw for the art for his next album. And Buff says he made a video, and Pony wants to have Buff make a video for him in Los Angeles. And we get to know these people. Yeah, that's right. Tim goes back to the liquor store for more beer as he's already drunk out of his fucking mind. Not that he already was. While the others are back in their hangout spot, and Pony sings a song for his friends as the actor Jace Batlock, or Bartok, whatever the name is, can sing. And I guess I reviewed him before as the subway singer in the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man films. And Jeff acts like a prick to Pony about why he's so special and proves he's not, but he can sing, and gives the actor props, and I give the actor props for that, as I'm also liking the cinematography, as I admire the locations Richard Linklater picks for different movies, like Vienna and Before Sunrise, a few films in Texas, and Southern California in A Scanner Darkly. BB somehow disappears when Suze, Buff, and reluctantly Jeff go in the limousine with Pony and Erica, and Tim hit it off briefly, and honestly, their chemistry wasn't the best thing about the movie, in my opinion. BB gets back to her place and takes some pills to the point it might have overdrugged her later in the film, while they get to a restaurant and the waitress says it's closed, but they choose to get some food to go anywhere. And they ride in the limousine, and Buff gets sick in the limousine and vomits outside the window, which is amusing, but at the same time gross. As Buff steals a gnome from a house in front of the yard, and the scenes are amusing in my opinion. Jeff gets uncomfortable and makes up how he has to take a leak and abandons them to go somewhere else, as Pony and Suze have a pleasant conversation while they wait for him for the longest time. Meanwhile, Tim and Erica have some beers, and Jeff bumps into BB as she mixed the pills with alcohol, which is very unwise of her for damn sure. And she talks about her rehab life while Jeff thinks about going to New York with Suze while he strips up until the limousine shows up while he's nude, and the dialogue is fine and sometimes funny and not a so haha kind of way, but in a strange way. They get back to from the limousine, and Tim witnesses Suze and Pony were briefly kissing while Buff brings back the gnome, and Tim says Erica went back to the hotel, and Jeff tries to tell Suze he wants to go to New York with her, but he smells like booze and brings up how much she kisses Pony, and Pony and Tim get in a brief argument, and Suze wants to leave Burnfield behind and goes to New York without Jeff and dumps Jeff's ass thanks to Tim bringing it up in the first place. And that's why he's an asshole to begin with. And no wonder I don't like this fucking character. Jeff and Tim take a walk in front of the convenience store where Nazir calls the cops on Tim's ass, while he and Jeff briefly talk about anarchy and says fuck the world until the cops come by and arrest Tim's ass. And he confesses he hit a woman whom I was led to believe was Erica because he was fucked up, which is a bullshit reason to hit a woman anyways. And I'm going to say he was drunk, while Nazir talks with Jeff about his life as he seems like a smart guy and says life is complicated, and Jeff goes to the van and is led to believe he killed Erica, and he thinks about what he saw while Buff gets himself a coffee as well as a Twinkie. And Jeff thinks about reporting the crime Tim did as he was led to believe, and while Nazir talks with Buff as he calls him a drunk and an idiot. And he says he's moving to LA while Jeff hangs up the phone, and after Nazir goes inside, Jeff tells Buff that Erica is dead, and eventually she shows up in a limousine, not dead by the way, and Buff goes with Pony and Erica to Los Angeles. And Jeff tells Pony to go fuck himself as they take him off in the limousine, and Tim comes back to the corner with some beer as the cops let him out of, and tells Jeff Suze stayed the night at Pony's place, or hotel room, let's say, and he tells him he lied to him about the murder of Erica, and he tells him anything as he could believe it, and calls Jeff a fucking fool. And Jeff tells Tim to go home until Nazir comes back out and sees Tim as Tim has a gun, and so does Nazir, and they spot BB on the roof and call the ambulance, while Nazir's wife decides to divorce him and tells Jeff what's wrong with people and how stupid they are, as he throws his life away. And we move on to the next morning. This climax was terrible, as this was a terrible ending, as this is not the best Richard Linklater could do, in my opinion. I think he could do better. Now it's time for my rating. I'll give this movie a 6.9 out of 10. The characters are interesting to watch, as I do like them, except for Tim, as he's a total asshole. And I like how we get to know them for this entire movie, as this isn't the greatest movie by director Richard Linklater, in my opinion. The cinematography was good to look at while at nighttime in the town Burnfield, And what I admire about Richard Linklater is how he picks different spots around the world, like Vienna Before Sunrise to a few places in Texas, in Slacker and Dazed and Confused, and he picks a town for this movie, as I like the way it was shown in this movie. I like the movie as it's not one of my favorites, but it's fun in its own way. What makes it kind of sad was some term of events that happened in this movie from start to finish. And this is a recommendation to have fun with only once, in my opinion. But honestly, it just had a terrible ending. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me, and next time I will be back with the Newton Boys. And until we get there, let's live life in the world.